Morgan Freeman stood quietly in the first-class line at Atlanta International Airport, his weathered hands gently gripping a worn leather satchel. Dressed in a simple navy suit that had seen better days and comfortable shoes that prioritized function over fashion, he was a stark contrast to the luxury around him. A flight attendant watched him with barely concealed disdain, unable to hide her judgment. What happened next would leave everyone on that plane completely speechless and forever change one woman's perspective on success and humanity. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you about Sandra Bullock that will truly touch your heart. The Atlanta International Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Announcements blaring overhead, travelers rushing to gates, conversations blending into white noise. The massive terminal was a symphony of human movement, a crossroads where thousands of lives briefly intersected before continuing on their separate journeys. In the exclusive first-class check-in area, separated from the main terminal by velvet ropes and potted plants, a distinguished older gentleman waited patiently in line. That man was Morgan Freeman, though few recognized him beneath his well-worn fedora and behind his rimless glasses. He stood with quiet dignity, seemingly oblivious to the luxury and pretension that surrounded him in the premium check-in area. His appearance was modest, a navy suit that showed signs of frequent wear along the elbows and cuffs, a simple white shirt without a tie, and a pair of comfortable loafers that had clearly walked many miles. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed Hollywood royalty or Oscar winner. Perhaps because of this, he stood unnoticed among the business executives and wealthy travelers that typically populated the premium line, each tapping impatiently on their phones or checking expensive watches. Yet anyone who took a closer look might sense something different about him. It wasn't just his appearance, but the tranquility he exuded. While everyone else seemed rushed and anxious, Morgan stood there with a serene expression, as if perfectly content to exist in that moment. He observed the world around him with curious, kind eyes, soaking in the human drama that unfolded in every corner of the busy terminal. A young mother struggled with a crying infant 3 lanes over, her face etched with exhaustion. Morgan watched her with empathy, his eyes softening at her struggle. When she dropped her boarding pass, no one around her seemed to notice, except Morgan, who made a small gesture toward a nearby attendant, silently directing help her way. The small act of kindness went unnoticed by everyone else, yet it revealed volumes about the man in the worn navy suit. Behind the first-class check-in counter stood Rebecca Winters, a senior flight attendant with 15 years of experience serving the elite. At 42, Rebecca had worked her way up from economy class to become one of the airline's most requested premium cabin attendants. She took immense pride in her position, considering herself a gatekeeper of sorts to the exclusive world of luxury travel. Her uniform was impeccable, not a wrinkle in sight, her makeup flawless, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun that accentuated her sharp cheekbones and critical eyes. A small diamond pin on her lapel indicated her senior status, a badge she had earned through years of catering to the whims of the wealthy and powerful. Rebecca had become an expert at assessing passengers at a glance, determining who truly belonged in first class and who might have simply gotten lucky with an upgrade. She could spot a first-time premium passenger immediately. They were the ones who looked too excited, who took photos of the champagne, who seemed grateful rather than entitled. Real first-class passengers, in her experience, treated luxury as their birthright. When her eyes landed on Morgan, her lips tightened almost imperceptibly. She quickly categorized him. Probably a one-time upgrade, possibly using points or a family connection. Not a real first-class passenger. His worn satchel and dated suit had immediately triggered her internal alarm system. In her mind, he was out of place, a disruption to the carefully curated experience she prided herself on maintaining. "Next, please," Rebecca called, her voice crisp and professional. Her eyes darted past Morgan, seeking a more suitable first-class passenger behind him, but finding none, she resigned herself to serving the elderly gentleman in the worn suit. As Morgan approached the counter, he offered a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good afternoon," he said, his distinctive voice still somehow lost beneath the airport noise to Rebecca's unhearing ears. "Checking in for first class?" she asked, her tone making it sound like a question that couldn't possibly have a positive answer. She emphasized first class with subtle disbelief, as if giving him an opportunity to correct her assumption. Morgan nodded kindly. "Yes, ma'am, to Los Angeles." Rebecca's eyes swept over his worn satchel and dated suit once more, lingering on a small frayed thread at his cuff. "I see. And is this your first time flying first class with us?" Her emphasis on first time was subtle but unmistakable. Morgan's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "Oh, I've flown this way a time or two before." Rebecca tapped at her computer with manicured nails, her movements crisp and efficient. "May I see your ID and boarding pass, please?" Morgan handed over his passport and boarding information with unhurried movements. Rebecca scanned the documents, her eyes widening slightly at the name, but not making the connection. To her, Freeman was just a common last name, and she was too focused on his appearance to notice what was right in front of her. "You're in seat 1A, she said, unable to hide her surprise. Seat 1A was typically reserved for the airline's most valued customers, celebrities, CEOs, or extremely frequent flyers. That's our most premium position. The statement carried an unspoken question. How did someone like you get that seat? I know, Morgan replied simply. I requested it. I prefer watching the world go by when I'm in the air. Rebecca processed his boarding pass, her movements efficient but cold. Well, I'm sure you'll find it quite different from what you're used to, she said with a tight smile. The boarding area is to your right, where the leather seats are. Those are for first-class passengers only. She emphasized this last point as if worried he might not understand the concept or might accidentally wander into an area where he didn't belong. Morgan simply nodded. Thank you kindly for your assistance. As he walked away, Rebecca turned to her colleague, Melissa, and whispered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Honestly, they'll let anyone into first class these days. Did you see that suit? Probably older than my career. Melissa's eyes widened as she glanced at Morgan's retreating figure. Rebecca, she whispered urgently, don't you know who? An upgrade case, obviously, Rebecca interrupted dismissively. Probably used miles or has a family member who works for the airline. Definitely doesn't belong in 1A. Her colleague laughed nervously, already spotting what Rebecca had missed. A few passengers who clearly recognized the man she had just disrespected, their eyes following him with admiration and surprise. I don't think that's, Melissa began again, but Rebecca had already called the next passenger forward, her assessment of Morgan Freeman complete and filed away, unworthy. The first-class lounge was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Plush seating, ambient lighting, and attentive service created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of planes taking off and landing, while a careful sound design muffled the chaos of the terminal beyond its frosted glass doors. Morgan settled into a corner seat, pulling out a well-worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass from his satchel. The book's spine was cracked from frequent reading, its pages dog-eared and marked with pencil notes in the margins. He seemed perfectly content, occasionally glancing up to observe his fellow travelers with genuine interest. Across the lounge sat Catherine Chen, the 45-year-old CEO of a successful tech company returning from a business meeting. She had noticed the exchange at the check-in counter and recognized Morgan immediately. She watched him now, impressed by his calm demeanor despite the disrespect he'd received. Catherine had experienced similar judgments herself. As a young Asian American woman in the tech industry, She'd often been mistaken for an assistant rather than the boss. She understood what it felt like to be underestimated and categorized based on appearance. After hesitating for several minutes, Catherine approached Morgan's seat. "Mr. Freeman?" she said quietly, not wanting to draw attention. "I just wanted to say I'm a huge admirer of your work." Morgan looked up from his book, his face transforming with a genuine smile. "That's very kind of you to say. Thank you." His voice, with its distinctive timbre, was instantly recognizable. The voice that had narrated countless documentaries, had brought wisdom and gravitas to dozens of iconic film roles. "I particularly loved you in The Shawshank Redemption," Catherine continued. "Your portrayal of Red gave me hope during a very difficult time in my life." Morgan gestured to the seat beside him. "Would you care to join me for a moment? I always enjoy hearing how stories impact people." Catherine sat down, surprised and touched by his invitation. They spoke for nearly 15 minutes, not about his celebrity or wealth, but about storytelling, perseverance, and finding meaning in difficult circumstances. Not once did Morgan mention his achievements or status. Instead, he listened to Catherine with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her work and perspectives. As boarding time approached, Catherine thanked him for the conversation. "You know," she said hesitantly, "that attendant at check-in was quite rude to you." Morgan's expression remained serene. Perhaps she was having a difficult day. Or perhaps she judged a book by its cover, Catherine replied. "It happens to me all the time in my industry." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose it does. But I've found that responding to judgment with more judgment rarely solves anything. Sometimes people need to discover the truth in their own time, in their own way." When boarding began, Rebecca stood at the gate, greeting first-class passengers with practiced smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She complimented a banker on his new Rolex, recognized a regular passenger, and asked about his recent trip to the Maldives, and exchanged pleasantries with a famous model about an upcoming fashion shoot. When Morgan approached, her smile faltered slightly, transforming into something more perfunctory. "Your boarding pass, sir," she said, extending her hand with noticeably less warmth than she'd shown to others. Morgan handed it over with the same gentle smile he'd offered earlier. "Thank you." Rebecca scanned it, then returned it with a perfunctory nod. "Enjoy your flight in first class," she said, emphasizing the words as if they were a joke only she understood. As Morgan walked past, Catherine, who was right behind him in line, fixed Rebecca with a disappointed look. "Do you know who that was?" she asked quietly. Rebecca's expression remained unmoved. "Someone who needs fashion advice, clearly," she replied with a smirk. Catherine shook her head. "That's Morgan Freeman." She walked past, leaving Rebecca momentarily frozen. The realization didn't fully sink in for Rebecca until she boarded the plane herself and saw Morgan settling into his seat, 1A, the most premium spot on the aircraft. She watched as the captain himself came out of the cockpit to shake Morgan's hand, leaning in to have a brief, animated conversation that left both men smiling. Rebecca's face flushed slightly, but she quickly composed herself. After all, celebrities were just people, and his outfit had been genuinely dated. She'd done nothing wrong, she told herself as she prepared the cabin for service. She'd simply been maintaining standards. But something tugged at her conscience. A small voice that whispered she might have been unfair, that her judgment had been based on superficial observations rather than anything of substance. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Rebecca handled the pre-flight service in first class. She moved efficiently through the cabin, offering drinks and hanging jackets. When she reached Morgan, her manner was noticeably stiffer than with other passengers. "Would you care for a pre-flight beverage, sir?" she asked, her voice professional but lacking warmth. "Just water, please," Morgan replied, his deep voice now unmistakable in the quiet cabin. "No ice." Rebecca returned with his water, placing it on his armrest without meeting his eyes. "Your water, Mr. Freeman." Morgan looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you. Rebecca, isn't it?" he asked, reading her name tag. "Yes, sir," she replied, surprised he had bothered to check. "You know, I've always believed that a person's true character shows in how they treat others when they think it doesn't matter," he said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar gravitas that had narrated so many important stories. Rebecca felt heat rising to her cheeks. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Morgan replied, not unkindly. "But that's all right. We all have moments we're not proud of." Rebecca quickly moved on to the next passenger, her hands slightly trembling. For the first time in her career, she felt genuinely ashamed of how she had treated someone. The worst part was that Morgan Freeman had been nothing but polite to her, despite her obvious disdain. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Rebecca found herself replaying the check-in encounter in her mind. Had she really been that transparent in her judgment? Had other passengers noticed? The thought made her uncomfortable. More troubling was the nagging realization that this wasn't an isolated incident. How many other passengers had she judged based solely on their appearance? How many times had she provided lesser service to those she deemed unworthy of the first-class experience? These uncomfortable questions followed her as she prepared the meal service. The premium cabin offered a 5-course dinner on transcontinental flights, with wines selected by a renowned sommelier. As Rebecca arranged the linen tablecloths and fine china, she found herself glancing repeatedly at Morgan, who was engaged in reading his book, seemingly at peace. As the flight progressed, Rebecca found herself avoiding Morgan's section as much as possible, asking other attendants to serve him when feasible. But about halfway through the flight, the lead attendant asked her to check if Mr. Freeman needed anything, as the others were busy with meal service in business class. Reluctantly, Rebecca approached his seat. Morgan was watching a documentary on his screen, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Mr. Freeman, is there anything you need?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Morgan paused his movie and looked up. "Actually, yes. I'd love to have a conversation if you have a moment." Rebecca glanced around nervously. "I'm working, sir. Just a minute of your time," he said. "Please." Something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. Rebecca nodded and stood beside his seat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "This suit," Morgan began, running his hand along the sleeve of his jacket, "was given to me by my father when I got my first real acting job. It wasn't new then, and it certainly isn't now. But I wear it on every important journey as a reminder." Rebecca listened, unsure where this was going, her discomfort visible in her rigid posture. "You see, when I was starting out, plenty of people judged me, dismissed me, or decided I didn't belong in certain spaces," Morgan continued, his voice deepening with emotion. "My father told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Son, your worth isn't in what you wear or how others see you. It's in how you treat people, especially those who can do nothing for you.'" Rebecca's eyes began to glisten with unshed tears. "I've met presidents and homeless people, Rebecca. I've broken bread with royalty and shared meals with prison inmates. And I've learned that fancy clothes and important titles tell you almost nothing about a person's character or value." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Mr. Freeman, I want to apologize for—" Morgan raised his hand gently. "No need. We all make mistakes. The question is, what we learn from them." "I judged you without knowing anything about you," she admitted quietly. "I do that a lot, I realize now." Morgan nodded. "The world trains us to value the wrong things. It takes courage to unlearn those lessons." Rebecca stood in silence for a moment, processing his words. "May I ask you something, Mr. Freeman?" "Of course. Don't you ever get angry when people treat you that way? When they don't see who you really are?" Morgan considered the question. It would be easy to get angry, but anger rarely teaches anyone anything useful. Besides, he added with a small smile, who I really am isn't the famous actor. That's just what I do. The man in this worn suit, that's closer to who I am. I don't understand, Rebecca admitted. We all wear costumes, Morgan explained. Designer clothes, uniforms, job titles, they're just costumes we put on. The real person is who you are when all that's stripped away, how you treat the janitor when no one's watching, whether you return your shopping cart, if you make space for someone else's humanity even when it's inconvenient. Rebecca had never thought about it that way. Her uniform, her role as a premium cabin attendant, these had become so central to her identity that she'd forgotten they were external trappings, not the core of who she was. I should get back to work, she said softly. Thank you for talking to me instead of reporting me. Morgan smiled. We're all works in progress, Rebecca, me included. For the remainder of the flight, Rebecca found herself reflecting deeply on Morgan's words. She served the first-class cabin with a new perspective, seeing the passengers not as walking status symbols, but as individual humans with their own stories. She noticed things she had overlooked before. An elderly businessman gently tucking a photo of his grandchildren into his wallet, a famous actress quietly slipping off uncomfortable designer heels when she thought no one was looking, a young tech entrepreneur nervously practicing what seemed to be a speech under his breath. Each passenger, regardless of their expensive clothes or important jobs, was fundamentally human, with insecurities, hopes, and struggles that their external trappings couldn't reveal. This realization settled over Rebecca like a warm blanket, both comforting and challenging her to be better. As the flight entered its final hour, a light turbulence caused some commotion in the cabin. A young man in seat 3C, flying first class for what was clearly his first time, turned pale and gripped the armrests tightly, his fear evident. In the past, Rebecca might have offered a perfunctory reassurance before moving on. But today, she sat in the empty seat beside him for a moment, explaining the turbulence in calm, simple terms, and sharing a story about how she too had been afraid of flying when she first started her career. The young man's gratitude was palpable, and as Rebecca stood to continue her duties, she caught Morgan watching the interaction, a small, approving smile on his face. When the flight landed in Los Angeles, Rebecca stood by the exit, thanking passengers as they deplaned. When Morgan approached, she met his eyes directly. Thank you, Mr. Freeman, not just for flying with us, but for the lesson. Morgan paused, studying her face. You know, we meet people for a reason, Rebecca. Sometimes we're the teacher, sometimes we're the student. Today, I think we were both. I won't forget this, she promised. Good, Morgan replied. But remember, the point isn't to feel bad about yesterday, it's to do better tomorrow. He extended his hand, and Rebecca shook it, feeling something profound and permanent shift within her. I have a question, she said impulsively, as he was about to leave. The book you were reading, Leaves of Grass, is it good? Morgan's face lit up. It's extraordinary. Walt Whitman understood something essential about humanity, that we contain multitudes, that we are complex and contradictory and gloriously unfinished. You might enjoy it. I'll look for it, Rebecca promised. As she watched him walk down the jetway, Rebecca realized something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The encounter had stripped away years of superficial values that had unknowingly taken root in her heart. That evening, in her hotel room, Rebecca did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. Their relationship had been strained by Rebecca's increasing focus on status and appearances, something her modest, hard-working mother had never understood or valued. Mom, she said when her mother answered, I met someone today who reminded me of you. Oh? Her mother replied, surprise evident in her voice. Yes, Rebecca continued. He helped me see something I've been missing for a long time. The conversation lasted over an hour, the longest they'd spoken in years. Rebecca shared the experience with Morgan Freeman, but more importantly, she listened as her mother talked about her life, her garden, her volunteer work at the local shelter. Rebecca realized with a pang how much she had missed by dismissing her mother's simpler life as less valuable than her own career in luxury service. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Rebecca's home. Inside was a first edition of Leaves of Grass with a simple note: "Remember, we contain multitudes. Judge less, wonder more." Meph. Rebecca ran her fingers over the cover, recalling Morgan's words about looking beneath the surface, about finding the real person behind the costume. She placed the book on her coffee table, a daily reminder that true class has nothing to do with the section of the plane you sit in, and everything to do with how you treat your fellow travelers on life's journey. The following month, Rebecca requested a transfer to train new flight attendants. She wanted to share what she had learned. That service wasn't about catering to status, but about honoring the humanity in every passenger, regardless of what seat they occupied or what clothes they wore. Her first day as a trainer, she shared the story of her encounter with Morgan Freeman, omitting her own embarrassing behavior. She told the new hires about his worn suit and the powerful lesson it contained. "The most distinguished person I ever served," she concluded, "was distinguished not by his wealth or fame, but by his capacity to see the humanity in everyone around him. That's the standard we should aspire to." 1 year later, Rebecca was serving in first class on a flight to New York when she recognized a familiar figure boarding the plane: Morgan Freeman, once again dressed in his navy suit, the same worn leather satchel in hand. Their eyes met, and Rebecca smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Freeman. It's good to see you again." Morgan studied her face for a moment before recognition dawned. "Rebecca," he said with a nod. "Still flying the friendly skies, I see." "Yes, but with new eyes," she replied. As she helped him settle into his seat, Rebecca noticed the book he pulled from his satchel, a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. "Is that good?" she asked, nodding toward the book. Morgan smiled. "Very. It's about paying attention to the world around you, seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. I think you might enjoy it when you're done with Whitman." "I'd like that," Rebecca said, and she meant it. As the flight took off, Rebecca looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. A year ago, she had seen only categories: the wealthy, the upgraded, the belonging, and the not. Today, she saw people, each with their own story, their own struggles and triumphs. In the most unexpected way, a chance encounter with Morgan Freeman and his old suit had taught her what true wealth looked like. Not the accumulation of things or status, but the richness of seeing and honoring the humanity in every person she met. In the end, we all face a choice. Do we measure people by their appearances and possessions, or by the content of their character and the kindness in their hearts? Morgan Freeman's quiet dignity reminds us that sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from grand speeches, but from genuine human connections in unexpected moments. And perhaps there's a deeper wisdom here too, that the clothes we wear, the positions we hold, and the status we achieve are ultimately costumes. What matters in the end is who we are beneath those costumes, how we treat others when no one important is watching, the kindness we offer without expectation of return, and the humanity we recognize in each person we meet along the way. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and the wisdom that can transform us when we least expect it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that reminds us of our shared humanity. And tell us in the comments about a time when someone saw past your exterior to recognize your true value.